Welcome back to Computers, Ethics, and Society. I'm Tom, and today we are talking about an article on hate speech on social media. This will be another topic that we're going to kind of go into in depth. We've already done a unit on free speech and the First Amendment, right? And now we're going to kind of look at this specific topic, applying the kind of principle of free speech and looking at a fringe case like this hate speech, and particularly its manifestation in social media, right? Now, if you notice, when we talked about the First Amendment, I shied away from the idea of free speech and kind of talked about protected speech, right? And the reason why is because you need to actively protect certain kinds of speech, right? For example, dissent from the government or something like this. If you're critiquing, what the governor said or something like this, the idea is that kind of speech should be protected, right? And hate speech is one of those kind of controversial areas of speech, and it's something that some people think that needs to be protected, right? And notice right off the bat that um, you know, um, your justification for protecting speech really needs to be clarified when it comes to something like hate speech, right? So, for example, if you think the whole purpose around free speech or the whole reason why we promote free speech is because it facilitates democracy, right? Democratic back and forth and stuff like this. It's not clear that the great majority of hate speech should be protected, right? A lot of hate speech that shows up on the internet or otherwise is not really proposing any kind of serious political view. And oftentimes, historically, hate speech is not really associated with the facilitation of democracy, right? And so there's a question there about, well, what is the reason for protecting this kind of speech? What's the principle by which we're protecting certain kinds of speech? And also, one other thing to note is, hate speech, how it shows up on the internet and social media has really thrown, a monkey wrench in how it kind of manifests, right? It tends to amplify hate speech, as we're all pretty aware, right? It gives people a certain degree of anonymity, right? You can create a profile and say whatever on various social media platforms. It gives you a huge audience, great reach. And negative comments tend to draw a lot of attention. They get a lot of likes, a lot of shares, a lot of reposts, these kinds of things. And so it becomes more of an issue than I think perhaps even before the age of social media. So there are issues, and we'll continue to talk about this and look at some of the specifics to the features of social media. Now, this article by Guiora and Park is really kind of like a helpful overview of this idea of hate speech on social media. It provides some history about Supreme Court precedents and this kind of stuff. And so the thesis they advocate is pretty minimal. It asks for narrow limitations on hate speech on social media, and basically applying those on a case-by-case basis, right? And there's two main tools that they advocate for. One is the use of the Brandenburg test, which we'll talk about, and the second one is the use of Mill's harm principle, which we talked about in the last module, right? So let's talk about the Brandenburg test for a second. Brandenburg versus Ohio, if I remember correctly, is a case in 1964, or at least that's when the incident happened. Brandenburg was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. I don't know if he had some kind of stature, but anyways, when he has a rally and there's all the kind of people, and he says that if our president continues to suppress the white Caucasian race, then it's possible that there might have to be some revengeance taken. It's an exact quote. It's not quite grammatically correct, but nonetheless, that's what he said. And based on that, he was arrested. I think the charges were incitement to violence, right? That his claim about some revengeance being taken was kind of a prompt to people to, take up arms or engage in violence or something like this. And it went to the Supreme Court, and actually Brandenburg won. And I think there's a video in this module on this, and it's a really interesting case because I think the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, took it up and advocated for his side and thought that what he said was protected under the First Amendment. And but out of that came this Brandenburg test, right, which is these kind of three conditions that need to be met if the government is able to step in and censor that speech, right? And the first one is that it has to promote imminent harm or illegal activity, right? So it has to be a case where you're telling someone to do something bad, or kind of directly engaging and promoting that someone does something bad, right? So if you were yelling like, hit him, right? That kind of stuff. The second one is that there's a likelihood that the listeners will participate in illegal activity. So if you're saying something and telling people that they should all steal from Walmart or something, and you're in there and everyone just looking at you like you're crazy and you have no relationship to these people, then that's not really going to meet that second criterion, right? And then the third is that the speaker intended to cause such illegality, right? So that there has to be a serious intention for that to happen, for that to occur, that there has to be, a certain degree of likelihood of success, and that intention is there, right? And the idea with the Brandenburg case was that, what Brandenburg said did not really meet all three of those. But this can be used, the authors, Guiora and Park, use this and say, well, we can apply this with social media, right? Is the person really promoting imminent harm or promoting illegal activity? Is there a likelihood that people will participate in it? Is the speaker being serious when they're doing it, right? And we can use this to kind of see which cases we should censor, right? The other principle that the authors rely on is Mill's harm principle. So in my notes for this week, I don't go back over that, but Mill's harm principle is the idea that you can, take away another person's rights only if it's going to prevent them from harming someone else. Right. This is kind of the basis behind like taking someone's rights away when they go to jail, when they're arrested, right? In that case, you can take someone's rights away in order to prevent them harming others, right? And so that goes hand in hand with this Brandenburg test, right? It's really a test to consider whether or not your speech is causing some kind of genuine harm, right? And if you notice, we already have cases in which speech is restricted, right? In cases of libel and defamation in particular, right? Because what you're saying is, you're saying something false in order to hurt someone else, hurt someone's reputation, hurt someone's career, whatever it is. And so, the Brandenburg test is a way to kind of sift through cases that are kind of close to defamation, share some features, but are not quite the same, right? Now, if you look at the application of these principles at the end of the article, two things to note is one, that they're pretty liberal about it, right? In the sense that they're pretty hands off. They really consider some different cases, and they only, I think, if I remember correctly, they only think that the speech really counts as hate speech in one of the cases that they consider. So, they're, pretty restrictive about when they want to use these things and think that something meets that criteria. And the other thing is that notice that the way in which they're approaching this is something that really parallels ethics of care, right? In the sense that if you remember, ethics of care has a feature of being a particularist view in ethics, meaning they don't have an across the board application of moral principles, right? They think you need to look at the context of each and every person and their actions, right, to kind of determine what the right thing to do is. And they make this contrast very clearly. They talk about like a bright line rule versus, this kind of case by case basis, and they advocate for case by case basis. And so having that kind of structure in place and understanding the difference is really, really important here. Now, a couple other things I just want to mention. This just kind of provides an overview of some of the more detailed kind of features and tools of analyzing speech, hate speech on social media, and we will go into more depth into the particular positions, stronger positions, in the following couple of weeks. But one is there's a couple of videos in this module that are really good to watch. One on the Brandenburg test, and one is Nadine Strawson on hate speech and talking about the features of it. And the other thing to note is that lots of other countries are not as kind of forgiving about hate speech, right? When we're talking about it causing harm, and you get out of the dialogue around the First Amendment in the United States, there are lots of other countries that take a much stronger position when it comes to hate speech. So, for example, if you're a Holocaust denier in Germany, you could be arrested. In Canada, they have laws against hate speech, right? And there are other places in European Union that forbid hate speech, right? Now, the reasoning by and large for restricting hate speech is because they think that hate speech itself is a violation of human or civil rights, right? That just saying something that falls in line with hate speech, right, is itself to take away someone's human rights, right? And so that would be a very different take than the kind of way in which the Brandenburg test is kind of utilized and interpreted. But it is in line with it in the sense that, or in line with something like Mill's harm principle, right? If you think that hate speech itself is an act that harms others, then you're still kind of in line with the same tools, but you're applying them in a different way, right? So that's just something to think about, so we kind of have a broader perspective on this and are able to kind of come at it from some different angles. And then as we move forward, we'll look at some positions, people who think actually hate speech should be really protected. And then another person who actually thinks that hate speech should be very restricted, right? And censored very heavily on social media. So that's it for this week, and I look forward to talking with all of you again soon.